Behind Clint Eastwood's legendary 1976 Western lies a shocking web of secrets that would make even the most seasoned film buffs do a double take. From a director fired mid-production to an author with a terrifying KKK past, from Eastwood accidentally mouthing other actors' lines to creating Hollywood rules that still exist today, this classic film harbors some of the most bizarre and unexpected stories in cinema history. Here are the 15 weird facts you didn't know about the Outlaw Josey Wales. Fact 1. Secret KKK. Author controversy. When Clint Eastwood picked up the novel The Rebel Outlaw Josey Wales in 1975, he thought he was reading the work of a Cherokee storyteller named Forrest Carter, who had grown up with his tribal grandparents in the wilderness. The book's dust jacket presented Carter as an authentic Native American voice sharing stories passed down through generations. And Eastwood was so impressed with the gritty tale that he personally invested his own money to secure the film rights. But the truth behind the author was far more sinister than anyone in Hollywood could have imagined. Forrest Carter was actually the pen name of Asa Earl Carter, one of Alabama's most notorious white supremacists and a founding member of his own violent splinter group called the Ku Klux Klan of the Confederacy. Carter had spent the 1950s and 60s as a rabid segregationist who organized beatings of black Americans and wrote inflammatory racist pamphlets that he distributed throughout the South. Most shocking of all, Carter was the speechwriter responsible for Alabama Governor George Wallace's infamous inaugural address in 1963, where Wallace declared, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." Carter had crafted those words that became a rallying cry for racial hatred across America. After losing his own bid for Alabama governor in 1970, Carter completely reinvented himself. Moving to Texas and assuming the identity of a Cherokee writer, he even chose the name Forrest as a tribute to Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who had founded the original Ku Klux Klan. Carter tanned his skin, grew a mustache, lost weight, and convinced everyone he met that he was a full-blooded Cherokee who had been raised in the mountains by his tribal grandparents. The New York Times finally exposed his true identity in 1976, shortly after Eastwood's film became a hit, but Carter continued denying the connection until his death in 1979. Fact 2. The Eastwood Rule creation. Clint Eastwood's behind-the-scenes power struggle during the Outlaw Josey Wales became so notorious that it permanently changed how Hollywood operates, creating a rule that still governs film productions today. The drama began when Eastwood clashed with the film's original director, Philip Kaufman, who had been hired to helm the project and had already spent considerable time developing the script and planning the production. Just 10 days into filming in October 1975, tensions between the two men reached a breaking point over their conflicting visions for the movie. Kaufman wanted to tone down the political themes from the source novel and work at a more methodical pace, while Eastwood preferred a faster shooting schedule and disagreed with Kaufman's interpretation of the character. The situation became even more complicated because both men were reportedly interested in actress Sondra Locke, whom Eastwood had cast against Kaufman's wishes. Since Eastwood was not only the star but also the producer through his company Malpaso, he had the power to make the ultimate decision. He instructed his producing partner Robert Daly to fire Kaufman and immediately took over directing duties himself, something that was highly unusual in the industry. Kaufman had already invested weeks of work into the project and had helped develop the screenplay, making his sudden dismissal particularly controversial among Hollywood professionals. The Directors Guild of America was absolutely furious about this unprecedented move and saw it as a dangerous precedent that could undermine directors' authority on film sets. When Warner Brothers and Eastwood refused to reverse the decision or bring Kaufman back, the Guild imposed a $60,000 fine on the production. More importantly, they established what became known as the Eastwood Rule, which specifically prohibits any actor or producer from firing a director and then personally taking over the directing role on the same project. This rule remains in effect today and requires that if a director is fired, their replacement must be someone with no previous connection to the film and must be a full Directors Guild member with proper credentials. Fact 3. Clint's son played his screen son. In one of the most poignant casting decisions in the Outlaw Josey Wales, Clint Eastwood chose his own 7-year-old son Kyle to play the role of his character's murdered child in the film's tragic opening sequence. This deeply personal choice added an extra layer of emotional weight to the scenes that established Josey Wales's motivation for his entire quest for vengeance throughout the movie. The opening of the film shows Josey Wales, as a peaceful Missouri farmer living happily with his wife and young son before Union soldiers, known as Redlegs, attacked their homestead. Kyle Eastwood appears in these early scenes as the innocent child who calls out, "Little Josie, come on in, let's get you cleaned up," alongside his screen mother, creating a picture of domestic tranquility that makes the subsequent violence even more devastating when the family is brutally murdered by the marauding soldiers. Having his real son portray the character whose death drives the entire plot gave Eastwood a unique perspective as both director and actor during these crucial scenes. The decision meant that when Eastwood's character discovers his family's bodies and begins his transformation from farmer to vengeful outlaw, the actor was literally looking at his own child lying motionless, which undoubtedly influenced the raw emotion he brought to those moments. Kyle Eastwood was already showing signs of the artistic talent that would later make him a successful jazz musician and composer, and this early film appearance marked his first time working with his father on a movie set. The casting choice also reflected Eastwood's hands-on approach to filmmaking, where he often preferred working with people he knew and trusted rather than going through traditional casting processes. This family connection remained largely unknown to audiences for years, as Kyle wasn't credited prominently in the film's opening titles, making it a hidden detail that only the most dedicated fans and film historians eventually discovered when researching the production's behind-the-scenes stories. Fact 4. Eastwood unconsciously mouthed other actors' lines. One of the most amusing behind-the-scenes problems during the filming of The Outlaw Josey Wales involved Clint Eastwood's unconscious habit of silently mouthing other actors' dialogue while they were speaking, a quirk that repeatedly ruined takes and frustrated the crew. This issue became particularly problematic during scenes with Chief Dan George, the veteran Native American actor who played Lone Wadey, Josie's wise and philosophical Cherokee companion throughout much of the film. Chief Dan George was in his 70s during production and sometimes had difficulty remembering his lines perfectly, which required extra patience and multiple takes to get scenes right. However, Eastwood's well-intentioned attempt to help actually made things worse, because he would unconsciously move his lips along with George's dialogue, completely unaware that he was doing it until crew members pointed it out after watching the footage. The problem became so persistent that camera operators and script supervisors had to constantly watch Eastwood during other actors' close-ups and repeatedly tell him to stop mouthing the words. Eastwood later revealed in DVD commentary that he was completely unconscious of this habit and had no idea he was doing it until the crew brought it to his attention multiple times throughout the production. To solve the issue with Chief Dan George specifically, Eastwood developed a creative workaround that played to the older actor's natural storytelling abilities. Instead of drilling George on exact memorized lines, Eastwood would tell him to forget the script and simply say something like, "Chief, just tell me the story about the man who rode over the hill." This approach allowed George to draw on his natural narrative skills and deliver the dialogue in a more organic way that felt authentic to his character. The technique worked so well that some of George's most memorable moments in the film came from these improvised storytelling sessions rather than strictly scripted dialogue, creating a more natural dynamic between the two characters. Fact 5. Orson Welles called it greatest Western ever. When Orson Welles, the legendary director of Citizen Kane and one of cinema's most respected voices, appeared on The Merv Griffin Show shortly after The Outlaw Josey Wales was released in 1976, he delivered what may have been the most prestigious endorsement any Western film has ever received from a major filmmaker. Welles didn't just praise the movie or give it a positive review, he made the stunning declaration that he had just seen the greatest Western ever made, and went on to call Clint Eastwood one of America's finest directors. This praise was particularly remarkable because it came from someone who was notoriously difficult to impress and had spent decades working alongside Hollywood's greatest talents. Welles had directed masterpieces like Citizen Kane and Touch of Evil, and had worked with legendary directors throughout his career, so his opinion carried enormous weight in the film industry. For him to single out a relatively new director like Eastwood, and place this Western above classics by John Ford, Howard Hawks, and other masters of the genre was an extraordinary statement. The endorsement was especially meaningful because Eastwood was still proving himself as a director at the time, having only made a few films behind the camera including Play Misty for Me and High Plains Drifter. Many critics were still skeptical about whether the actor known for spaghetti westerns and Dirty Harry could successfully transition to directing serious dramatic films. Welles' enthusiastic support helped legitimize Eastwood's directing career and gave the film additional credibility with both critics and audiences, who might have dismissed it as just another action western. The appearance on Griffin's popular talk show also brought significant attention to the film during its theatrical run, helping to boost its box office performance and establish its reputation as something more than typical Hollywood entertainment. Time magazine later echoed Wells's sentiment by naming the film one of the year's top 10 movies. Fact 6. Massive return on tiny budget. The Outlaw Josey Wales became one of Hollywood's most impressive financial success stories of the 1970s, earning an astounding $31.8 million at the box office against a production budget of just $3.7 million. This remarkable return on investment meant that the film made back nearly 9 times its original cost, establishing it as one of the most profitable Western films ever made during a decade when the genre was supposedly dying at the box office. The tiny budget was particularly impressive considering that the film featured elaborate action sequences, multiple shooting locations across several states, and a large cast including established actors like Chief Dan George and John Vernon. Eastwood's reputation for efficient filmmaking and his ability to complete projects on time and under budget played a crucial role in keeping costs so low, as he was known for making quick decisions on set and rarely requiring multiple takes unless absolutely necessary. The financial success was even more remarkable because Western films were considered box office poison in the mid-1970s, with most studios avoiding the genre after a series of expensive flops had convinced executives that audiences were no longer interested in cowboy movies. The success of Josey Wales helped prove that well-made westerns could still find an audience and make serious money when produced efficiently and marketed properly. Eastwood's personal investment in acquiring the film rights to the original novel also paid off handsomely, as he had put his own money into securing the property before any studio was involved. The film's success at both domestic and international box offices helped establish Eastwood's production company Malpaso as a major force in Hollywood and gave him the financial freedom to continue making the kinds of films he wanted to make. The profit margin was so impressive that it became a model for other filmmakers trying to prove that smaller budget films could compete with big studio productions when they focused on strong storytelling rather than expensive special effects. Fact 7. Author named after KKK founder. The pen name Forrest Carter that Asa Earl Carter chose when he reinvented himself as a Cherokee author was actually a deliberate tribute to one of the most controversial figures in American history, Confederate General Nathan Bedford Forrest, who became the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. This choice of name reveals just how deeply Carter's racist ideology remained embedded in his thinking. Even as he was crafting a completely new identity as a supposed Native American storyteller, Nathan Bedford Forrest was a wealthy plantation owner and slave trader who became one of the Confederacy's most feared cavalry commanders during the Civil War. Known for his brutal tactics and his role in the Fort Pillow Massacre, where Confederate forces killed surrendering Union soldiers, many of whom were black. After the war ended, Forrest helped establish the original Ku Klux Klan in 1866 and served as its first national leader, overseeing the organization during its most violent early years when it terrorized freed slaves and their white supporters across the South. By choosing Forrest as his first name, Carter was sending a coded message to those who shared his white supremacist beliefs while simultaneously fooling publishers, readers, and Hollywood executives who had no idea about the connection. The irony was especially twisted because Carter was presenting himself as a Cherokee writer telling stories about Native American culture and wisdom, when in reality he was honoring a Confederate general who had fought to preserve slavery and later led an organization dedicated to maintaining white supremacy through violence and intimidation. Carter's choice to add his real middle name Earl as part of his new surname created Bedford Forrest Carter, making the tribute even more obvious to anyone familiar with Civil War history. The fact that this homage to a KKK founder was hidden in plain sight on the cover of a book that became the basis for a major Hollywood film shows just how successfully Carter managed to deceive everyone involved in the production. Fact 8. Anachronistic photography, flash powder. One of the most glaring historical errors in The Outlaw Josey Wales occurs during a scene where a photographer uses flash powder to take pictures of dead bodies in the street after a gunfight, but this technology simply didn't exist during the film's 1865 setting. The scene shows the photographer igniting a bright flash to illuminate his subjects, creating a dramatic visual effect that unfortunately represents a major anachronism that places the technology more than 20 years ahead of when it was actually invented. Flash powder wasn't developed until 1887 by German photographers Adolf Methe and Johannes Gaedeke, who created a mixture of magnesium powder and potassium chlorate that could produce a bright burst of light for indoor and nighttime photography. Even after its invention, the technology didn't become widely available or commonly used by photographers until the 1890s, when manufacturing improvements made it safer and more affordable for professional and amateur photographers. During the actual Civil War period when the film is set, photographers relied entirely on natural sunlight and had to work with extremely long exposure times, sometimes requiring subjects to remain perfectly still for several minutes to avoid blurring. This is why most Civil War photographs show people with very serious expressions, since it was nearly impossible to hold a smile for the extended time needed to capture a clear image. The famous Civil War photographers like Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner had to use large, cumbersome cameras mounted on tripods and work only during daylight hours with sufficient natural illumination. They certainly couldn't take spontaneous photographs of crime scenes or dramatic nighttime events like the scene depicted in the film suggests. The mistake is particularly noticeable because the flash creates such a prominent visual moment in the scene, drawing attention to itself rather than blending into the background. This type of historical inaccuracy was fairly common in Western films of the 1970s, when filmmakers often prioritized dramatic effect over strict historical authenticity. Fact 9. Director jealousy over Sandra Locke. The bitter feud between Clint Eastwood and director Philip Kaufman that led to Kaufman's firing wasn't just about creative differences or directing styles, but allegedly included a much more personal element involving their mutual romantic attraction to actress Sandra Locke, who was cast as Laura Lee in the film. This behind-the-scenes love triangle added an extra layer of tension to an already complicated production and may have been the final factor that pushed their professional relationship beyond the point of repair. Sandra Locke was 32 years old at the time and married to sculptor Gordon Anderson, though their marriage was reportedly unconventional and they lived largely separate lives. She had been working primarily in theater and television when Eastwood discovered her and decided she was perfect for the role of the Kansas woman who becomes Josey's romantic interest during his journey toward redemption. Kaufman strongly opposed Locke's casting from the beginning and made his objections known to Eastwood and the production team, but Eastwood pushed forward with his choice, despite the director's protests. According to Hollywood insiders and biographers who later wrote about the production, both men became infatuated with the actress during the early stages of filming, creating an uncomfortable atmosphere on set that went far beyond typical creative disagreements. The situation became even more complicated because Eastwood held all the power as both star and producer, while Kaufman was essentially an employee who could be dismissed at any time. Some crew members later reported that the tension between the two men was obvious to everyone working on the film, and that their conflicts often seemed to have more to do with personal issues than professional ones. Eastwood and Locke did indeed begin a romantic relationship that lasted for many years and included 6 films together, suggesting that whatever attraction existed during the production of Josey Wales eventually developed into something much more serious and long-lasting than a simple on-set romance. Fact 10. Fake Cherokee words in source material. When linguists and Cherokee language experts began examining the original novel, The Rebel Outlaw Josey Wales, after Asa Earl Carter's true identity was exposed in 1976, they made a shocking discovery that revealed just how deep his deception went. All of the Cherokee words and phrases that Carter had sprinkled throughout his book to add authenticity to his supposed Native American heritage were completely fabricated, with no connection whatsoever to the actual Cherokee language or any other legitimate Native American dialect. Carter had presented himself as someone who grew up speaking Cherokee with his tribal grandparents in the mountains, and he included various words and expressions in his novel that he claimed were authentic Cherokee terms passed down through generations of his family. Publishers, readers, and even Hollywood executives took these linguistic elements at face value, assuming they were genuine examples of Cherokee vocabulary that added cultural authenticity to the Western story. However, when actual Cherokee speakers and academic linguists studied the words Carter had used, they found that none of them matched real Cherokee grammar, pronunciation patterns, or vocabulary structures. The fake words didn't even follow the basic linguistic rules that govern how Cherokee syllables and sounds are constructed, suggesting that Carter had simply invented random combinations of letters and sounds that he thought might sound appropriately Indian to non-native readers. This linguistic fraud was particularly insulting to Cherokee people and other Native American communities, because Carter was essentially mocking their language and culture while simultaneously profiting from his false identity as a Cherokee storyteller. The discovery added another layer of evidence to the growing case against Carter's fabricated background and helped convince skeptics that Forrest Carter was indeed a complete fiction created by the former Klansman. The revelation also raised questions about how thoroughly publishers and film studios researched the backgrounds of authors whose work they were promoting, especially when those authors claimed to represent marginalized communities and cultures. Fact 11. Crew members visible in rape scene. One of the most embarrassing production mistakes in The Outlaw Josey Wales occurs during a tense scene where Comancheros attack and attempt to assault Laura Lee and Grandma Sarah, but careful viewers can actually spot the legs of film crew members accidentally caught in the frame. This continuity error happens during what should be one of the movie's most serious and disturbing moments, when the women are being threatened by the bandits before Josey Wales arrives to rescue them. The mistake occurs when the camera is positioned to show the assault from a low angle, capturing the action as the attackers surround their victims in what was meant to be a dramatic and frightening sequence. However, the cinematographer and camera operator apparently didn't notice that their positioning had inadvertently included parts of the film crew in the shot, specifically the legs of crew members who were standing just outside the intended frame, but still visible through gaps between the actors. This type of error was more common in films made during the 1970s, when productions often worked with smaller budgets and tighter schedules that didn't always allow for multiple takes or extensive review of footage before moving on to the next scene. Eastwood's reputation for efficient filmmaking and his preference for completing scenes quickly may have contributed to the mistake going unnoticed during production. The visibility of crew members in the frame completely breaks the illusion of the scene and reminds viewers that they're watching a movie rather than witnessing real events, which is particularly jarring during such an intense and violent moment. Modern audiences watching the film on high-definition displays and large screens are more likely to notice this type of error than viewers who saw the film in theaters or on television broadcasts with lower resolution. The mistake has become a favorite discovery among film enthusiasts who enjoy spotting continuity errors and production goofs, though it remains one of the more awkward examples because of the serious nature of the scene where it occurs. Fact 12. Dead actor blinks on screen. One of the most noticeable acting mistakes in The Outlaw Josey Wales occurs during an emotionally charged scene where the young character Jamie dies from his wounds after being shot by pursuing Union soldiers, but actor Sam Bottoms accidentally blinks his right eye while he's supposed to be completely dead in Josey's arms. This continuity error happens during what should be one of the film's most poignant moments, when Wales loses his young companion and finds himself truly alone in his quest for vengeance. The scene takes place after Jamie has been mortally wounded during a gunfight with bounty hunters who are tracking Wales across the countryside. Jamie manages to help Wales kill their pursuers before succumbing to his injuries, and the sequence was meant to show the tragic cost of the violence that follows Wales wherever he goes. Eastwood's character cradles the dying young man and delivers dialogue about how Jamie was a good soldier who never questioned the cause they were fighting for. However, during this supposedly touching death scene, Bottoms clearly blinks his right eye while the camera is focused on his face, completely destroying the illusion that his character has passed away. The mistake is particularly obvious because the blink happens during a close-up shot where Jamie's face is prominently featured, making it impossible for viewers to miss once they notice it. This type of error was surprisingly common in films of the era, when actors playing dead characters often had difficulty remaining completely motionless for extended periods during long takes. The mistake suggests that either the scene required multiple takes and this was the best version available, or that the error went unnoticed during editing when the footage was being reviewed and assembled. The blink has become a favorite discovery among movie mistake enthusiasts and is frequently mentioned in lists of notable film goofs, particularly because it occurs during such a dramatic and supposedly emotional moment in the story. Fact 13. Impossible Gatling gun ammunition. During one of the most memorable action sequences in The Outlaw Josey Wales, Eastwood's character takes control of a Gatling gun and uses it to mow down dozens of Union soldiers in a spectacular display of firepower, but the scene contains a major technical impossibility that defies the actual capabilities of Civil War-era weaponry. Wales appears to fire the weapon continuously for an extended period, spraying bullets across the entire enemy camp and killing numerous soldiers, despite the fact that real Gatling guns of that period could hold a maximum of only 20 to 50 rounds depending on the specific model. The Gatling gun was one of the first successful machine guns, invented by Richard Gatling in 1862 and used by Union forces during the later stages of the Civil War. The weapon worked by rotating multiple barrels around a central axis, with each barrel firing in sequence as the operator turned a hand crank. However, the ammunition was stored in a gravity-fed hopper or magazine system that had very limited capacity compared to what the film depicts. Even the largest capacity Gatling gun magazines held only 50 rounds, which would be expended very quickly given the weapon's rate of fire of approximately 200 rounds per minute. In the film, Wales fires the gun for what appears to be several minutes without stopping to reload, which would require hundreds of rounds that simply couldn't fit in the weapon's feeding mechanism. The scene also shows Union soldiers who had been operating the gun before Wales took it over, and they had presumably already fired some of the ammunition, meaning even fewer rounds would have been available when Wales began his assault. Real Gatling gun operators had to frequently stop to reload their weapons during extended firefights, but the film ignores this limitation in favor of creating a more dramatic and visually impressive action sequence. This type of technical inaccuracy was common in Western films, where dramatic effect often took priority over historical accuracy or mechanical realism. Fact 14. C. Stand equipment. Visible in final battle. One of the most glaring production mistakes in The Outlaw Josey Wales occurs during the film's climactic shootout between Wales and Captain Terrell's men, when the distinctive metal legs of a C-stand piece of film equipment become clearly visible in the frame as one of the Union soldiers falls off his horse. This embarrassing error happens during what should be the movie's most intense and dramatic moment, when Wales finally confronts the man responsible for murdering his family and burning down his farm. A C-stand is a heavy-duty metal tripod used on film sets to hold lights, cameras, reflectors, and other equipment, and it has a very distinctive three-legged design with adjustable metal arms that make it instantly recognizable to anyone familiar with movie production. The equipment is essential for professional filmmaking but is obviously never supposed to appear in the actual footage, since it completely destroys the illusion that viewers are watching events from the 1860s rather than a modern movie production. The mistake occurs during the complex action sequence where multiple riders are being shot and falling from their horses in rapid succession, creating a chaotic battle scene that required careful coordination between the stunt performers, camera operators, and lighting crew. In the confusion of filming this elaborate sequence, someone apparently failed to move the C-stand out of the camera's field of view before rolling film on that particular take. The error is particularly noticeable because the C-stand's metal construction and modern industrial design look completely out of place in a Civil War-era Western setting, making it impossible to mistake for any kind of period-appropriate equipment or scenery. The fact that this obvious mistake made it through the editing process suggests that either the crew didn't notice it during post-production review, or this was the best available take of a difficult stunt sequence, and they decided to use it despite the visible equipment. Fact 15. Author's mysterious death cover. Up. The death of Asa Earl Carter on June 7, 1979, was officially attributed to heart failure, but the real circumstances surrounding his demise were far more disturbing and were deliberately concealed by his family to protect what remained of his reputation as the beloved author, Forrest Carter. The official cause of death listed on his death certificate and reported in newspapers was simply cardiac arrest, which seemed like a natural way for a 53-year-old man to pass away, especially given the stress of maintaining his double identity for nearly a decade. However, the ambulance driver who responded to the emergency call later revealed to one of Carter's friends that the actual circumstances were much more sordid and tragic than the family wanted anyone to know. According to the emergency responder's account, Carter had been drinking heavily and got into a violent physical altercation with his own son on the night he died, a confrontation that escalated to the point where Carter fell during the struggle and was unable to get back up. The ambulance driver reported that Carter had choked on his own vomit while lying on the floor, apparently too intoxicated and injured from the fall to save himself, and that he was already dead when the emergency crew arrived at the scene. This version of events painted a much grimmer picture of Carter's final moments and suggested that his violent tendencies, which had been so prominent during his days as a Klansman and segregationist activist, had continued to plague his personal relationships even after he reinvented himself as a peaceful Cherokee storyteller. Carter's family chose to cover up these details and stick with the simpler explanation of heart failure, likely because they wanted to preserve the positive image he had built as Forrest Carter and protect the sales of his books, particularly The Education of Little Tree, which had become extremely popular and was bringing in significant income for his estate.